Japan says it must defend Taiwan. Hong Kong students will soon be re-educated. And Enes Kanter calls out LeBron James over China. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News Headlines. For months, Japan has been signaling stronger support of Taiwan in the face of aggression from the Chinese Communist Party. Japan has even suggested it could use military force. Over the summer, the Deputy Prime Minister said Japan must defend Taiwan if China invades. And recently, Japan changed the name of the de facto Taiwanese embassy in Japan to include Taiwan in the name. That angered the Chinese Communist Party. So the Communist Party won't let other countries have official Taiwanese embassies. And when countries have unofficial Taiwanese embassies, the party even throws a fit when the word Taiwan is used in their name. It's totally normal, not psychotic at all. Ugh. But the Chinese regime's hissy fits have not stopped Japan's support for Taiwan. Now, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is saying the U.S. and Japan cannot stand by if China invades.
The armed encroachment on Taiwan is a major danger to Japan's territory, whether geographically or spatially. A Taiwan emergency is a Japanese emergency, and therefore an emergency for the Japan-U.S. alliance.
That's a pretty big deal. Did it anger China? You betcha. The Communist Party fired back, framing what Abe said as Japanese imperialism.
Japan has colonized Taiwan for half a century, has committed countless crimes, and bears serious historical responsibilities to the Chinese people. Anyone who dares to go back to the old path of militarism and challenge the bottom line of the Chinese people will get their heads badly battered.
That's totally normal and not psychotic at all. I mean, what the heck? That's not something a normal country's spokesman says. Imagine Jen Psaki saying enemies of America will get their heads bashed in. But it's looking more and more like China will do something to Taiwan. According to human rights group Safeguard Defenders, China is hunting Taiwanese nationals through forced deportation. Beijing has been pressuring foreign governments to extradite Taiwan nationals to China. It's happened to over 600 Taiwanese nationals. And China is pressuring other countries to extradite Taiwanese citizens to China, even though they have an agreement with Taiwan to specifically not extradite Taiwanese citizens to China. But as Hong Kong knows all too well, the Chinese regime does not keep their agreements. Again, China is pressuring other countries to send people who are not Chinese citizens to China. This is kidnapping. And speaking of kidnapping, Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai is totally fine. More after the break. Welcome back. You know, for some reason, people just don't believe the Chinese Communist Party when they say tennis star Peng Shuai is fine. Well, except the International Olympic Committee. They came to the not at all suspicious, unanimous conclusion that she's fine. In fact, the IOC says they had a second video call with Peng Shuai and she's okay. The IOC also defended itself against accusations they're covering for Beijing by saying they're taking a very human and person-centered approach. Is it just me, or are the IOC statements sounding more and more like Chinese propaganda? The IOC also says they're using quiet diplomacy with China, which totally works according to lots of people. Yes, the IOC's diplomacy is so quiet, it's completely silent. But when it comes to Peng Shuai's situation, what the IOC really wants to say is, hey, how about those Winter Olympics in Beijing in 2 months? Who's excited about that? Meanwhile, despite the best efforts of the IOC and the Chinese Communist Party, the Peng Shuai story just won't disappear. The EU is demanding verifiable proof Peng Shuai is safe. What? creepily staged photos of her with stuffed animals wasn't proof enough? Well, it wasn't enough for the Women's Tennis Association. The WTA is suspending tournaments in China over the treatment of Peng Shuai. Now this is big. The WTA threatened to do this earlier, and they've actually followed through, even though the organization stands to lose hundreds of millions of dollars over this. The WTA has a 10-year deal to hold its season-ending tournament in Shenzhen, where organizers committed to some $150 million in prize money and millions more on tennis development in the country. But the WTA is actually putting human rights ahead of money in China. I almost can't believe it, because this almost never happens. I'm more used to seeing stories like this: major American companies like Nike, Coca-Cola, and Apple lobbying against anti-slave labor bills that would affect their business in China. Or Airbnb hosting rentals in Xinjiang on land owned by a Chinese paramilitary organization sanctioned by the US government for complicity in genocide and forced labor. Or the IOC pushing Chinese communist propaganda. But let's all take a minute to congratulate the WTA for standing up to the Chinese Communist Party. What is this feeling? Is it hope? You know, I always thought women's tennis was just a racket, but it turns out they have some serious balls. What can I say? It's a game of love. Hong Kong schools will be getting a new value education curriculum framework. Doesn't that sound fun? Of course, getting something new means you have to get rid of something old. So Hong Kong's Education Bureau is getting rid of requirements for learning about the motherland with critical thinking and respect for human rights. But they'll be taught something much better: law-abidingness and loving China and Hong Kong. It also tells Hong Kongers that as a Chinese person, they have a responsibility to defend their country and their home. I'm sure Hong Kongers will readily accept that identity. And if they won't, American companies will be there to lend a hand. If you've ever watched The Simpsons, you probably remember seeing this, a joke about how the CCP covers up the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Well, how's this for a joke? Disney Plus just removed that entire episode of The Simpsons in Hong Kong. So The Simpsons joke about Chinese censorship got their show censored. It's a perfect circle. That episode also has Homer viewing the mummified corpse of Mao, and he says Mao looks like a little angel that killed 50 million people. It also has Selma staring down a Chinese tank. Look familiar? And now for something I never thought I'd say. I'd rather watch women's tennis than Disney. And after the break, the return of everyone's favorite game show. Welcome back. You know, after talking about how the WTA stood up to the Chinese Communist Party and Disney sold out to the party, I've been inspired to bring back a little segment we did back in the before times. Yes, it's time for everyone's favorite game show, Sellout or No Sellout. First up, Ray Dalio. He's the founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world. Bridgewater just raised over $1 billion for their new China fund. This week, Dalio was on CNBC when he was asked about whether investing in China is really a good idea right now. Here's how that went down.
One of the quick questions I just want to ask you on China, though, is clearly there's human rights issues. There's questions right now about this Chinese tennis player, Peng Shuai. There have been questions about Jack Ma. How do you think about that piece of it when it relates to investing there?
Well, I can't be an expert in those types of things. What I basically do, and for 50 years I invest all over the world, I look to whatever the rules are. If the government has a policy that I should do a certain thing and so on, but I can't be an expert in all of those particular dynamics of that. I really have no idea.
Okay, so first, Ray Dalio seems to admit that he has no idea about the political situation in China, a country where he's investing over $1 billion of other people's money. Is that really his defense? If you watch this show, you know that everything is political in China. And yet the guy in charge of one of the largest China funds in the world is asked about this, and he basically turns into the shruggy guy. But it gets even better.
So the guidance of the government is the most important thing. It's these are political. It's like, and then I look at the United States and I say, well, what's going on in the United States, and should I not invest in the United States because other things and not our own human rights issues or other things?
Ah, yes, the old, well, America has human rights problems too. Right out of the Chinese Communist Party playbook. To his credit, the CNBC anchor does not let Dalio get away with this.
Look, there are things that happen in the United States that I don't agree with, that I imagine you don't agree with, but I think that those things are different than some of the things we see happening in China. People aren't, the government isn't disappearing people, for example.
Okay. Look, you want to get into the policy of disappearing people. I'll give a little bit of a perspective of that, okay? What they have is an autocratic system. And one of the leaders described it. He said that the United States is a country of individuals and individualism. And that's what it's about. He said in China, it's an extension of the family. He said, if you look at the word country in China, it consists of two characters, state, family. And that has to do with Confucian. And it's very much a top-down. And as a top-down country, what they're doing is that it's that kind of like a strict parent. They behave like a strict parent.
Ah, yes, the Chinese Communist Party is just like a strict parent. I remember all the stories Shelley told me about how her strict Chinese parents kidnapped her and held her in a black jail until she did her homework. No, that never happened. Because the Chinese Communist Party isn't a strict parent. They're an authoritarian regime that kills people and sells their organs. And here's another thing. Let's stop blaming Confucius. It's not the Chinese Confucian Party. It's the Chinese Communist Party. They're disappearing people because they're communist. Confucius didn't say, genocide is fine because the government said so. Here's something Confucius did say. In the face of a wrong or unrighteousness, it is the duty of the son to oppose his father, and the duty of the servant to oppose his superior. So Confucius would have supported the WTA. In between his investing billions in China, claiming ignorance, and then defending the Chinese regime as a strict parent, Ray Dalio is a giant sellout. But here's someone who's not a sellout. NBA star and major critic of the CCP, Enes Kanter. He's become a U.S. citizen. He's also added freedom to his name. Now, freedom is his last name. Personally, I would want to be able to say, freedom is my middle name. But this does mean you would see freedom on the back of his jersey. That is, you would if his coach didn't keep him on the bench for most of the season, for some reason. He's already been banned in his home country of Turkey for his political views, and China has been a big focus of his lately, especially his shoes. Yeah, his shoes are awesome. He's also said he wants to educate LeBron James on human rights abuses in China. Kanter, well, Freedom, said, I'm sure it's going to be a very uncomfortable conversation for him. I don't know if he's going to want that. I'll make that really comfortable for him. I don't know if he's educated enough, but I'm here to educate him. And I'm here to help him because it's not about money. It's about morals, principles, and values. It's about what you stand for. There are way bigger things than money. Though LeBron has previously said he doesn't want to give his energy to Kanter's criticism of him. He has to preserve his energy for all the brown-nosing he has to do for the CCP. So unlike LeBron James, Enes Kanter, freedom is no sellout. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, a viewer who supports our channel on the crowdfunding websites Patreon and Locals. Bitter Comments says on Patreon, I want merch mocking China-loving celebs. Would 100% buy one of John Cena. I'm glad you brought this up. So if you haven't heard, we finally have China Uncensored merchandise, like this fantastic Xi Jinping the Pooh t-shirt. You can see everything we have to offer on ChinaUncensored.tv/merchandise. And none of it is made in China. But what kind of new merchandise would you like to see from us? Things mocking John Cena, like this image I found on Reddit. What's that, Shelley? Okay, so we can't make that exact image on a t-shirt, but we could make this t-shirt mocking China-loving U.S. companies about how I turned a blind eye to ethnic cleansing in China and all I got was this slightly cheaper t-shirt. Or maybe something we haven't even thought of. Let me know in the comments below what kind of things you'd like on a t-shirt or mug, or if there's other kind of merchandise you'd like. Thanks for your support, Bitter Comments, and thank you for watching. If you can, help us in the fight against the Chinese Communist Party by contributing on Patreon or Locals. You'll get some cool perks, including having me answer your question on the show. Links to everything are in the description below. But even liking and sharing these episodes is a huge help. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.